She had been invisible for 3 years. Every morning, Maya Carter walked into Redwood Valley Medical Center, changed into her scrubs, and did her job without complaint. The doctors talked over her. The charge nurses filed her reports without reading them. Dr. Adrienne Keller once told a resident, loudly enough for half the floor to hear, that she was competent enough for bedpans. Then a dying Navy SEAL was wheeled through the trauma bay doors, bleeding from 4 separate wounds, and before he lost consciousness, he grabbed the surgeon's wrist and said a name that stopped everyone cold. Not the chief of surgery, not the trauma director. "Get me Maya Carter. She's the only one who can save me." Before we go any further, if you're watching this story for the first time, hit follow right now and stay with me until the end. Drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Every single comment means the world to me. The call came in at 6:47 on a Wednesday morning, which was the kind of hour that separated the people who cared about their job from the people who were just waiting for their shift to end. Maya Carter was in the middle of restocking a crash cart in Bay 4 when the radio crackled and the charge desk lit up. She heard the words inbound trauma, multiple GSW, special operations personnel, and she set down the saline bag she was holding very carefully, the way you set something down when your hands need to be steady for what comes next. She had learned that habit a long time ago, not in nursing school. Around her, the ER at Redwood Valley Medical Center was running its usual pre-dawn friction. A man with a broken wrist from a car accident had been waiting 90 minutes and was making sure everyone knew it. One of the overnight interns, a third-year named Pollard, was trying to read a chart while holding a coffee cup that was clearly empty. The fluorescent lighting buzzed the way it always did above Bay 7, the fix for which had been on the maintenance request list for 4 months. Maya finished what she was doing. She dated the crash cart log, clipped it back to the hook, and walked out to the main corridor just as the ambulance bay doors opened. He came in on a gurney, moving fast. 2 paramedics working either side of him, one holding a pressure bandage against his left shoulder that was already soaked through. The patient was large, well over 6 feet, built the way people are built when their body has been used as a tool for a very long time. His face was pale under the blood. An oxygen mask covered his mouth, but his eyes were open, and they were tracking. That was the first thing Maya noticed. His eyes were tracking the room. Dr. Adrienne Keller arrived at the same moment from the opposite hallway, still pulling on his gloves. He was the kind of doctor who entered a room like he expected applause for it. Shoulders back, chin up, voice already loud. He had been trauma chief at Redwood Valley for 6 years, which was long enough to stop questioning himself and start expecting everyone else to stop questioning him too. "Talk to me," he said to the paramedics. 39-year-old male, Commander Ethan Cross, active military, gunshot wounds to left shoulder, right lateral thorax, left forearm, and a graze above the left ear. BP is 80/50 and dropping. He's been in and out on the way over. Lost consciousness twice. Keller leaned over the gurney. "We've got him. Bay 1. The gurney started moving. Maya fell into step alongside it, already reading the vitals on the portable monitor, already counting seconds. The patient turned his head. He looked directly at her. She recognized him in the same instant his eyes registered recognition of her. It was one of those moments that happens faster than thought, a hit of pure memory in the chest before the brain catches up. She kept her face still. He tried to say something through the mask, his hand moving weakly toward her arm, and she took hold of it without thinking. "Easy," she said quietly. "You're inside. You're in an ER." His grip tightened. He pulled the mask away from his face with his other hand. A nurse moved to replace it, and Maya held up one finger without looking, a gesture that stopped her. His voice came out rough and thin. "Carter." "Yeah. They said you were here." "I'm here." He closed his eyes and his grip relaxed, and she replaced the mask herself and walked with the gurney the rest of the way to Bay 1. Dr. Keller was already talking to the trauma team, calling out orders for blood, imaging, a chest consult. He didn't look up when Maya positioned herself at the patient's left side. "Nurse Carter." Keller's tone was the particular kind of neutral that meant he had noticed something and was choosing to address it minimally. "We need the ultrasound." "It's coming," said another nurse from across the bay. "Martinez is bringing it." "Then can you start a second line? Right anacubital?" It wasn't a question, it was an instruction designed to move her to a task he considered appropriate for her. Maya knew the difference. She had been receiving that particular variety of direction for 3 years. She started the second IV line. Her hands moved efficiently, no wasted motion. She had started IVs in vehicle cargo bays with no lighting and the patient jerking away from her. She had started IVs on soldiers who didn't want to admit they were hurt. An anticubital stick on a man lying still on a padded gurney took her about 40 seconds. While she worked, she was also watching his chest. There was something wrong with the breathing pattern, not visible on the monitor yet. The numbers were bad, but not catastrophically so. But she could see it in the movement of his ribs. The right side was rising slightly less than the left. It was subtle. It was the kind of thing you noticed if you had ever watched someone breathe in a situation where the wrong call meant they stopped. She capped the line and checked her watch. The chest X-ray team was 3 minutes away, minimum. The ultrasound had just arrived. "Dr. Keller," she said. He was on the phone with radiology. He held up one finger without looking at her. She waited exactly as long as it took her to decide she was done waiting. "Dr. Keller, I need to flag something about the right thorax." He finished his sentence to radiology, ended the call, and looked at her with an expression she recognized as the one reserved for people taking up his time. "Go ahead." His right side chest excursion is reduced. It started about 90 seconds ago. I think we may have a developing pneumothorax. Keller looked at the monitor. The oxygen saturation was sitting at 91, which was low but not yet alarming. He looked at the patient. He looked at Maya. "The SAT is 91. We'll have imaging in a few minutes." "By the time imaging confirms it, we could be looking at tension," Maya said. "The breath sounds on the right are diminished. I'd recommend—" "I'm aware of the differential, Nurse Carter." His voice had that specific quality. Not quite sharp enough to call out, just firm enough to close the door. "When the ultrasound is set up, we can take a look." The ultrasound tech was unwinding cords. Maya stepped back. She looked at Ethan Cross, at his face, still pale, at the monitor numbers, at the slight asymmetry in his breathing that she could see but apparently couldn't make anyone else see fast enough. She had been in this situation before, not in this hospital, not in this kind of room. She picked up a stethoscope from the supply cart. Not hers, nobody's in particular. She moved to Ethan's right side and listened, pressing the bell carefully just below his clavicle, then mid-chest, then at the base. Right side, almost nothing. Left side, clear. She straightened up. "Dr. Keller." "Nurse Carter, right side breath sounds are absent. This isn't developing. It's already there." The room changed temperature by a few degrees. Keller turned from the ultrasound he'd been supervising and looked at her with something that might have been irritation or might have been recalculation. It was hard to tell with him. The monitor alarmed. Saturation, 87, heart rate climbing. Keller moved to the right side himself. Listened. His expression shifted just slightly. A tightening around the eyes that she recognized as the face a person makes when they were wrong, and they know it but haven't decided what to do with that yet. "Get me a 14-gauge angio," he said to the room. Someone moved. Maya was already handing it to him. He looked at her for a second. Then he took the needle and performed the decompression, second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line, exactly where it needed to be. The rush of air was audible. The saturation began climbing back within 30 seconds. Keller straightened. He handed the used equipment off. He did not look at Maya again. The rest of the initial stabilization took about 20 minutes. Ethan Cross had 4 wounds, as the paramedics had reported, and the chest injury was the most urgent, but not the only problem. The shoulder wound had torn through muscle and nicked a blood vessel that wasn't catastrophic by itself, but was going to need intervention. The forearm was a through and through that had missed bone and major vessels, which was good luck in a situation where there wasn't much else. The head graze had bled heavily, as head wounds do, but the neurocheck was intact. By the time they had 2 units of blood running, a second consult ordered, and the patient's pressure stabilizing at something closer to acceptable, Maya had been in Bay 1 for the better part of an hour. She had handed off 3 things before Keller asked for them, corrected a medication dose calculation that the intern Pollard had gotten wrong, and talked Ethan Cross through a moment of panicked semi-consciousness when he'd tried to pull out his own IV. "You're okay," she'd said. "You're at a hospital in Phoenix. You've been here about 45 minutes. You're not going to die today." He'd gone still under her hand and looked at her and said, very clearly, "You always say that." "I mean it every time." That was all. He'd settled back and closed his eyes. Nobody else in the bay had heard it. Or if they had, they didn't register it as anything more than a nurse managing a confused patient. The problem started after he was stable enough to move to the ICU. That was when Dr. Keller had time to notice things he hadn't had time to notice during the acute phase. And one of those things was the fact that Maya Carter had effectively been directing traffic in his trauma bay for the better part of an hour. She was in the corridor outside Bay 1, updating the intake documentation on a tablet when he came to find her. "Walk with me," he said. It wasn't a request. She walked with him. He took her around the corner to a stretch of hallway between the supply room and the staff bathroom, the unofficial place in every hospital where conversations happened that nobody wanted overhead. "What was that in there?" he said. She kept her face neutral. "Can you be specific?" "The needle decompression. I was getting to it. The saturation was dropping. I know what the saturation was doing. I was there." He crossed his arms. "I have been a trauma physician for 16 years. I don't need a floor nurse flagging interventions for me." "You had the right call as soon as you listened," she said. "I wasn't trying to take over. I was trying to make sure we didn't lose him before you got there." He studied her. "That patient, he knows you." "He recognized me." "From where?" She held his gaze for a moment. "Does it matter right now?" Keller's jaw tightened. He was not a man who enjoyed unanswered questions, especially from people he'd already filed in a particular drawer in his mind. "It might matter quite a bit, depending on what your relationship is with a patient in my trauma bay." "My relationship with Commander Cross is not going to affect his care," she said. "It already helped it." She didn't wait for him to reply. She turned and walked back down the corridor. She heard him say her name once, Nurse Carter, and she kept walking because she had learned a long time ago that some conversations ended better when you were the one who ended them. The morning shift was almost over by the time she made it up to the ICU to check on him. He was in a private room, which told her something about whatever military or federal protocol had been triggered when they'd run his ID. There was a man in civilian clothing standing outside the door who was not a hospital employee, which told her something else. He looked at her badge when she approached, and then looked at her face and then stepped aside without a word, which told her he already knew who she was. She went in. Ethan Cross was awake. He was pale and hooked to approximately 14 things, but his eyes were clear and his color was better than it had been 3 hours ago, when she thought she might watch him die on a gurney in the ambulance bay. "Hey," he said. "Hey." She pulled a chair to the bedside and sat. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got shot 4 times?" He paused. "Which I did." "You did?" He looked at the ceiling for a moment. "I didn't know you were here. I mean, someone told me you were at a hospital in Phoenix. I didn't know it was this one." "I've been here 3 years." "Yeah." Something moved across his face. Not quite guilt. Something adjacent to it. "I looked for you after." "I know you did." She'd known. She hadn't made it easy. "I needed to disappear." "You were pretty good at it." "I had good teachers." That almost made him smile, but his face was too tired for it to land fully. He looked at her. "The shoulder's going to be a problem. The vascular surgeon is good. She's dealt with worse. I'm not talking about the surgery." He shifted slightly on the bed, a careful, guarded movement. "I'm talking about what happens after. I've got a situation, Maya." "I figured." "The guys who did this, it wasn't random. It was targeted. Someone told them where to find me." He watched her face. "Someone with clearance." She absorbed that. "You have a leak." "We have a leak. It goes high. I've been trying to document it for 4 months, and last night was what happens when someone decides to stop waiting for me to finish." His voice was steady, but she could hear the effort underneath it. "I need to know the file is somewhere safe. I had it on me when they brought me in." Everything you had on you when you came in went to the guy outside your door." He closed his eyes briefly. "That's either fine or it's a problem, depending on who he reports to." Maya was quiet for a moment. "You trust me?" He opened his eyes. "I called your name when I thought I was dying. What do you think?" She stood up. "I'll find out what I can about who that man reports to. Don't tell anyone else anything about what you just told me. Not until we know who's inside this." He nodded. Then, "You doing okay? Here, I mean, before all this." She looked around the room for a second. At the beeping monitors, at the IV lines, at the hospital walls that had been her world for 3 years. "I was managing. That's not what I asked." She picked up the chart from the hook at the foot of his bed, flipped through it, replaced it. Old habit. A way of doing something with her hands when she didn't want to answer a question directly. "I'm fine, Ethan." He let it go. He was still sharp enough, even shot and half-medicated, to know when she'd closed a door. She found out within the hour. The man outside Ethan's door was a federal agent, NCIS, as it turned out, from an office out of San Diego that handled cases involving military personnel and intelligence matters. His name was Garrett, and he was polite and professional and not particularly forthcoming, which was about what she expected. What she did not expect was for Dr. Keller to be waiting for her when she came back down to the ER floor. He was standing at the nursing station with the expression of a man who had made a phone call and received information he hadn't anticipated. "My office," he said. "Now." Her shift was technically over. She went anyway because she'd learned that some conversations were better handled before they had time to become something worse. Keller's office was small and organized in the way that compulsive people organize things. Everything in a specific place, nothing wasted. He closed the door and stood behind his desk rather than sitting. "I pulled your HR file," he said. She waited. "It's thin." He said it like it was an accusation. 3 years here, good reviews, no complaints from patients. Prior to that, nothing. Your employment history before Redwood Valley is essentially a gap. "I changed careers," she said. "From what?" "From something else." His jaw was doing the thing again. "You have no listed medical training beyond your nursing degree, but what you did in that trauma bay this morning was not nursing school knowledge. The way you assessed that pneumothorax, well, the way you moved in there, that's not a skill set you pick up in community health rotations." "I've worked in a lot of different situations," Maya said. "That's not an answer." "No," she agreed. "It's not." He put both hands flat on his desk. "Commander Cross is a special operations officer. There is a federal agent standing outside his room. You have a pre-existing personal relationship with the patient, an unexplained employment history, and a set of clinical skills that don't match your official record." He looked at her steadily. "Whatever is happening here, I need to know if it creates liability for this hospital." It was, she had to admit, a reasonable concern from his perspective. He wasn't entirely wrong to ask. She sat down in the chair across from his desk, which was not something she'd been invited to do. He stayed standing. "Commander Cross and I have history," she said. "Medical history? I worked with him in a previous professional capacity. Not here. Not as a civilian. That's all I can tell you right now, and I'm asking you to leave it there until we have more information about why he was brought in the way he was." "That's asking me to accept a significant, I know what I'm asking." She met his eyes. 3 years ago, you came to my review and said I was competent but not particularly ambitious. You wrote in my file that I had a tendency to overreach my scope of practice when I flagged the wrong dosage on a pediatric case, even though I was right." She paused. "I didn't say anything about it then. I'm telling you now so you understand that I know exactly where I stand in this building, and I'm asking you anyway. Whatever you think of my skills, or my record, or my file, I need you to leave what I just told you alone until I understand what's happening with that patient." Keller stared at her. She had watched him this morning, watched the moment he'd listened to Ethan's chest, and felt the absent breath sounds, and understood that she'd been right. She'd watched him take the needle she held out to him. She'd watched him not acknowledge any of it for the rest of the shift. He sat down now. He looked at his desk for a moment. "You're not going to tell me anything more than that," he said. Not right now. A long pause. I want daily updates on Commander Cross's status, he finally said, and I want to know the moment that situation in his room changes in any way that creates a security concern for this facility. Agreed. She stood up and walked to the door. Nurse Carter. She stopped, hand on the frame. The decompression this morning. He said it carefully, like someone choosing words out of a much larger argument. Good catch. She walked out without responding, because she didn't trust herself to say the right thing, and she'd learned that silence was almost always better than the right thing anyway. The rest of the afternoon passed the way afternoons pass in emergency medicine, in a series of problems that arrived without scheduling and demanded resolution immediately. She worked a 4-hour overtime because 2 nurses called out sick, and she didn't say no because she never said no. And because staying in the building meant she could keep track of what was happening on the ICU floor. What was happening was something that she didn't like the shape of. Around 3 in the afternoon, she took a break and went up to check the board outside the ICU and found that Ethan's room had been moved from the list of patient rooms to a blank space, a privacy flag that removed all visible information from the public log. That was standard for certain federal cases. It didn't alarm her. What alarmed her was the second man in civilian clothes who had joined Garrett outside the room. This one she didn't recognize. He was older, and he had the particular way of standing that she associated with people who had been trained to assess their surroundings without appearing to assess their surroundings. She recognized it because she had been trained the same way. She didn't go to the room. She went back to the ER and texted a number from her personal phone, not her work phone, and waited. The reply came 40 minutes later, just 4 words. Don't trust the room. Maya read it twice. She deleted it. She put her phone back in her pocket. She finished her shift, changed out of her scrubs, and drove home in the direction of her apartment. But before she got to her street, she took a different turn and drove for another 20 minutes to a storage facility on the east side of the city, where she had a unit she paid for in cash under a name that wasn't hers, that she had not opened in over 2 years. Inside it was the kind of equipment that a nurse would have no reason to own. She stood in the doorway for a long moment. The fluorescent light buzzed above her, not entirely different from the light in Bay 7 that nobody ever fixed. Then she went in and started taking stock of what she had, because something was coming, and she could feel the shape of it the way she'd learned to feel the shape of things that arrived fast and without warning and required you to already be ready. She had been ready before. She knew how to do this. She had just hoped she wouldn't have to. The storage unit smelled like motor oil and old canvas, and the fluorescent tube above her flickered twice before holding steady. Maya stood in the middle of the space and took inventory with the same deliberate calm she'd used in the trauma bay that morning. Not because she felt calm, but because calm was a decision you made before your hands started shaking. She'd learned that distinction the hard way, in a different country, a long time ago. The case in the back left corner was a hard-shell Pelican, gray, with combination locks she'd set to a sequence she hadn't used for anything else. She carried it to the center of the unit and opened it on the concrete floor. Medical kit, military configuration, tourniquet, chest seals, hemostatic gauze, decompression needle, the same needle she'd handed Keller this morning, except the ones in this case were hers. A satellite phone she hadn't charged in 8 months. A small encrypted drive no bigger than her thumb. A folded photograph she didn't unfold. And underneath all of it, wrapped in oilcloth, a Glock 19 with 2 loaded magazines and a third she'd left unloaded for reasons she couldn't entirely explain. She loaded the 3rd magazine. She put the gun in the back of her waistband and stood up. The text message had come from a number associated with a communications protocol she'd agreed to years ago. A dead drop system used by her old unit for exactly the situations where official channels couldn't be trusted. 4 words. Don't trust the room. It didn't tell her who was compromised. It told her that someone in that room was a problem, and that whoever sent the message knew it, and that she was the only person at Redwood Valley Medical Center who would understand what it meant, which meant she was also the only person who could do anything about it. She sat in her car in the storage facility parking lot for 20 minutes with the engine off, running through the geometry of the problem. Ethan had been targeted. The targeting required inside information, Someone who knew his location, his route, his operational status. He'd been trying to document a leak for 4 months. He'd gotten close enough that someone decided to shoot him instead of waiting for him to finish. Now he was in a hospital room with a federal agent outside his door and a second man whose allegiances she couldn't verify. And somewhere in that building were documents, or information, or both, that someone might very much want to make disappear before Ethan Cross was well enough to do anything about it. She needed to get back in. Not tomorrow, not after she'd slept and thought it through. Tonight. She drove back to the hospital and parked in the visitor structure rather than the employee lot. She still had her badge, but she didn't badge in through the main entrance. She used the loading dock entry on the hospital's east side, which she knew from 3 years of overtime shifts was monitored by a camera with a 12-second lag and a badge reader that sometimes accepted a tap on the second try. She had used it enough times for late arrivals that the security log would flag it as routine if anyone checked. The ICU was on the 4th floor. She took the stairs. She came out of the stairwell onto the 4th floor corridor at 9:23 p.m. and walked with the particular pace she'd developed in 3 years of hospital work. Not slow enough to look purposeless, not fast enough to attract attention. She had her badge clipped to her scrubs top, which she'd kept on under her jacket when she'd left, partly out of habit and partly because she'd had the thought that she might be coming back. Ethan's room was 412. From the end of the corridor, she could see that the door was closed. She could see one man outside it. Just one now. Garrett, the NCIS agent. No sign of the second man. She considered that for a moment. Then she walked down the hall as if she were headed to the nursing station, passing 412 on the way, and gave the door a quick look through the narrow window. Ethan was awake. He was looking toward the door. He had the particular alert expression of someone who had been watching his own room for the past several hours and didn't entirely trust what was outside it. Their eyes met through the window for about half a second. She kept walking. At the nursing station, she flagged down a night nurse named Torres, who she knew from the 3 overnight shifts they'd shared when she covered ICU understaffing. "Hey," she said, "I'm following up on the cross patient in 412. Dr. Keller wanted an update for the morning brief." Torres pulled up the screen. "He's stable. Pressure's been holding since 6. Surgery, consult confirmed for tomorrow, 0700. Anyone been in to see him tonight, besides staff?" Torres looked at her. "Why?" "Federal case. Dr. Keller's being cautious about who documents what. You know how admin gets." Torres sighed the sigh of someone who knew exactly how admin got. "The 2 agents came in around 5. One of them left around 8. The one's still out there. Garrett? He's been there all day, and there was a woman from the hospital's legal team, maybe 6:30, said she needed to photograph his intake documents for liability records." Maya kept her face still. "Which legal team member?" Torres frowned at the screen. "It just says administrative visit. She badged in through the main desk. Brunson or something. I didn't catch the first name." "Okay. Thanks." Maya touched the counter lightly. "Can you make sure the morning team documents the vitals every 2 hours instead of 4? Again, Keller's being thorough." "Sure, yeah." She walked away from the station. She did not walk back toward Ethan's room. She walked to the family consultation room 2 doors down, which was empty at this hour, and she went inside and stood in the dark for a moment with the door cracked. A woman from the hospital legal team, photographing intake documents. At 6:30 in the evening, when the legal department of any hospital closed at 5, she pulled out her personal phone and sent another message to the same number she'd texted before. 3 words this time. Someone accessed records. She waited. The reply came in 4 minutes. "We know. Stay close. Don't move him." She read it. She put the phone away. She sat down in one of the consultation chairs and let herself think clearly about what she was actually doing, because there was a difference between responding to a situation and walking back into one, and she needed to be honest with herself about which this was. 3 years ago, she had walked away from a life that had required her to make decisions in the dark without being able to explain them to anyone, and she had told herself she was done with that. She had meant it. She had come to Phoenix and put on nursing scrubs and done her job every day without complaint, and she had been good at it, and she had thought that was enough. And then a man she'd carried out of a burning building on a different continent had shown up in her trauma bay with 4 bullet wounds and called her name. And here she was, sitting in the dark in a hospital consultation room with a gun in the back of her waistband and an encrypted drive in her jacket pocket that she'd taken from the storage unit without quite deciding to. She wasn't angry about it. She'd moved past that kind of thing. But she was honest enough to recognize what was happening. She stood up. She was going to go back to 412, badge herself in as a nurse checking on a patient, and tell Ethan what she knew. That was the next step. Everything after that would depend on what he told her. She opened the consultation room door and came face to face with the second man. The one who'd been outside Ethan's room at 3 in the afternoon and was no longer there now. He was shorter than she'd clocked from a distance. 50s, gray at the temples, wearing a jacket too warm for the weather. He was looking at her with the expression of someone who had expected to find her in that room. "Miss Carter," he said. It wasn't a question. She kept her hand on the door. "Can I help you?" "I think we can help each other." He reached into his jacket. She tracked the movement with everything she had, and produced a leather credential holder. He held it open long enough for her to read it. Defense Intelligence Agency. The name on it said Vincent Mara. "I've been looking for you since about 4 this afternoon." "You could have asked the nursing station." "I wanted to speak with you without Mr. Garrett knowing about it." She looked at him. He had that same quality she'd recognized earlier, the trained stillness. But there was something else underneath it, something that looked, unless she was badly wrong, like genuine concern. "Walk with me," she said. Not because she trusted him, because she wanted to see how he moved and where he wanted to go. They walked toward the far end of the corridor, away from 412, which told her he wasn't trying to get past her to the room. That was one data point. "What do you know about the operation Cross was running?" he said, low. "I know what he told me, which isn't much." Which was technically true, in a narrow way. He's been documenting a network operating inside 3 federal agencies for the past 4 months. Supply chain fraud, military contracts, diverted equipment, the kind of thing that gets soldiers killed because the gear they're issued doesn't work right. Mara glanced behind them, then back at her. He got close enough to name names. That's why last night happened. "You're telling me this because the file he's been building isn't on him. He sent it ahead 3 days ago to a secure location he trusted." Mara stopped walking. He looked at her directly. "He sent it to you." The corridor was quiet. Someone in a patient room down the hall coughed. The monitors beeped their steady rhythms. "He didn't tell me that," Maya said. "He might not have had a chance to. He was in surgery half the day." Mara studied her. But it would explain why someone from a law office with connections to 2 of the individuals Cross was investigating showed up at this hospital tonight with a story about liability documentation. Maya was very still. "They were looking for a file he sent me. They're going to keep looking, and if they don't find it here, they're going to start looking at the people around him." He paused. "You understand what I'm telling you?" She understood. She also understood that she had an encrypted drive in her jacket pocket that she'd pulled from a storage unit she hadn't opened in 2 years. The same unit whose address she had given to exactly one person outside her family a long time ago. Ethan Cross. She had taken the drive out of old habit, out of the reflex that told her to grab the things that mattered when something was coming. She hadn't thought through why she'd grabbed that specific drive. She hadn't let herself think it through. She reached into her jacket pocket and closed her hand around it. "I need to verify who you report to," she said. "Reasonable," he told her. She filed the name away and she'd check it, and she'd know within 20 minutes whether it was real. "And I need to talk to Cross before I do anything else." "Also reasonable?" He stepped back slightly. "Room 412. I'll stay here." She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she walked back down the corridor to Ethan's room. Garrett glanced at her badge and nodded her through. Ethan was watching the door when she came in. His face shifted when he saw her. Not relief exactly, but the dropping of something he'd been holding. "You came back," he said. "I had some questions." She pulled the chair close and kept her voice low. "There's a DIA officer named Vincent Mara at the end of the hall. He says you sent me a file." Ethan was quiet for a beat. Then, "The drive in the storage unit." "Yeah." I put it there 6 weeks ago. I didn't know if I'd ever need to tell you. I was hoping I wouldn't. You could have asked me. I know. He looked at the ceiling. I didn't want you involved. A little late. I know that too. He looked back at her. The drive has names, dates, transaction records, and recorded communications. It's enough. If it gets to the right people, it ends this. Mara says the people the people you were investigating, sent someone to this hospital tonight to look for it. They're going to figure out they didn't find it here. And then they're going to start moving fast because the window before I'm well enough to talk to the right people directly is closing. He was breathing carefully, managing the pain through the conversation, the way you learned to manage pain when you didn't have the option of stopping. I need you to get that drive to Mara, tonight. I don't know if I trust Mara. I do. He held her gaze. He's the one who sent you the text. She processed that. 4 words. Don't trust the room, sent by a DIA officer who was currently standing at the end of a hospital corridor waiting for her to make a decision. How do I know the room situation is resolved? She said. Garrett's clean. The second agent who was here earlier, his jaw tightened. Garrett sent him home when he figured out the connection. That's why Mara needed to talk to you separately. The situation is contained. For now. For now, he agreed. She sat with it for a moment. The drive was still in her pocket. She could feel the edge of it against her fingers. If I give Mara that drive, she said carefully, what happens to it? It goes to a Senate Oversight Committee through a channel that bypasses the agencies being investigated. It takes about 72 hours. After that, he paused. The people who shot me are going to have significantly bigger problems than me. She looked at him, at the IV lines, the monitors, the bandaging she could see at the edge of his hospital gown. He looked terrible. He also looked more alive than she'd seen anyone look in a long time, which was the particular quality of people who had decided something and were committed to it. When this is done, she said, you're going to tell me how you found my storage unit address. Technically, you gave it to me. I don't remember that. You don't remember a lot of things you did when you were trying to keep people alive. He said it without judgment, just as a fact. You gave me 3 emergency contacts when we were in the field. The storage unit was one of them. I think you wanted someone to be able to find your kit if something happened to you. She had no memory of it, which didn't mean it hadn't happened. There had been months in that period that lived in her memory as impressions rather than sequences. Specific sounds, specific weights in her hands, specific faces. Not a clean narrative. Okay, she said. She stood up. She looked at him for a moment. You need anything before I go? I need this to be over, he said, but that's not what you're asking. I can get you a better pillow. These ones are terrible. He almost smiled. Yeah, okay. She got him a pillow from the supply closet outside and came back and helped him adjust it without disrupting the IV lines, which required both of them to work around the shoulder dressing carefully. It took longer than it should have. Neither of them said anything during it. Maya, he said when she was at the door again. She stopped. I'm sorry you had to come back to this. I know it's not what you wanted. She thought about the storage unit, the Pelican case, the drive she'd picked up without knowing why, the gun she'd loaded before she understood the full shape of what she was loading it for. I was already back, she said. I just hadn't admitted it yet. She walked out. She went to the end of the corridor where Mara was waiting, and she took the drive from her pocket, and she held it in her open hand between them. This needs to get where it needs to go, she said, and I need to know the moment it arrives. He took it. You have my word. Your word's the starting point, she said, not the ending point. She walked past him to the stairwell. She pushed through the door and started down the stairs, and she was halfway to the 3rd floor landing when she heard the sound from above, a door opening fast, footsteps, something falling, and then Garrett's voice from the 4th floor, sharp and controlled in the way that trained people got when something had gone very wrong very suddenly. Security to 4. Now. We have a problem in 412. She was already turning around before he finished the sentence, taking the stairs back up 2 at a time, her hand moving to her back, and she hit the 4th floor door and came through it to see Garrett in the corridor outside Ethan's room with his weapon drawn, facing the door, and Mara on the far side flattened against the wall with his phone to his ear, and a crash cart alarm screaming from inside room 412. She went through the door of 412 without waiting for clearance from anyone. The room was wrong in 3 ways simultaneously. The crash cart alarm was screaming because someone had knocked it, not because it had been activated by staff. The monitor above Ethan's bed was showing vitals that were bad, but not flatline bad. The kind of bad that came from a patient who had been physically stressed rather than medically crashing. And there was a man on the floor near the window who was not Ethan Cross, lying face down with his arms at his sides, not moving. Ethan was in the bed. He was upright, which he should not have been given what the shoulder dressing was doing, and his face was the color of old concrete, and he was holding the IV pole with one hand because his body had made the decision to get vertical before his physiology had agreed to it. "Down," Maya said, moving to him. "Lay back down right now." "There were 2 of them," he said. His voice was steady in the alarming way that voices got when adrenaline was doing all the structural work. "One got out." Garrett came through the door behind her with his weapon up and swept the room in under 2 seconds. He saw the man on the floor and stopped. "The window," Ethan said. Garrett went to the window. It was a hospital window, the kind that only opened 4 inches for safety reasons, and the screen had been pushed in from outside, from 4 floors up, which meant either someone had come up the exterior of the building or, more likely, someone had come through the building and used the window only as an exit vector, knowing the drop to the ledge below was survivable if you knew how to fall. Ethan was trying to stay upright and failing. Maya put both hands on his good shoulder and pushed him back against the pillow, not gently, because gentle wasn't going to accomplish anything against a man with special operations training whose body had decided it was still in a fight. "Ethan, you have a vascular repair scheduled for tomorrow morning. If you've torn it, we're moving that to tonight, and you do not want that." He let her push him back. His breathing was ragged. "The one on the floor came in through the door," he said. "I heard him badge in. The badge reader didn't beep the way it does when staff use it. It beeped twice, which means it was a cloned card. The system flags it but doesn't lock it. I had about 3 seconds." "What did you do with 3 seconds?" He glanced at the man on the floor. "Enough." The man was breathing. She could see the chest movement from here. She crossed to him, crouched, checked his pulse and his airway. Pulse strong, airway clear. There was a significant contusion developing above his left ear, and his right arm was at an angle that suggested something was broken. He'd be waking up in pain, and he'd be waking up in handcuffs, given that Garrett was already on his radio. She stood. She looked at Ethan's shoulder dressing. There was fresh blood at the edge of it, not soaking through, but present, which meant he'd stressed the repair enough to reopen something small. "I need to look at this," she said. "It's fine." "I didn't ask." He held still while she peeled back the edge of the dressing. The wound itself hadn't blown open. The sutures were intact, but the tissue around it was angry, and there was enough fresh bleeding to tell her the blood vessel repair was being tested in ways it shouldn't be tested 12 hours post-injury. She repacked the dressing with supplies from the room's emergency kit and held pressure. "Garrett," she said without turning around, "I need the vascular surgeon paged, now, not at 7 a.m. "I'm on it," Garrett said. He was already on his second call. Mara came through the door. He looked at the man on the floor, then at Ethan, then at Maya. His face was doing the careful calibration of someone processing multiple simultaneous problems and sorting them by priority. "The second one?" he said to Ethan. "Gone out the window. Ledge drops to the second-floor roof on the south side. He had maybe a 90-second head start." Mara was already on his phone. He stepped out. The room was quieter without him. The crash cart alarm had been silenced by someone in the corridor. A night nurse had appeared in the doorway, looked at the situation, and made the professional decision to handle the equipment issue without asking questions yet. Maya had worked with enough good nurses to recognize the reflex. "You clocked a cloned badge from a beep pattern," she said to Ethan. "You taught me that." She hadn't remembered teaching him that. It was the kind of thing she might have said once, in a vehicle or a staging area, the way you passed along small operational knowledge without marking it as instruction. The kind of thing that lodged somewhere and stayed. His color was still bad. She checked his pulse, elevated, which was expected, and his pupils, which were equal and reactive. The neurocheck from earlier had been fine, and nothing in the last 10 minutes had introduced a head injury, so she let that go for now. How much pain are you in? She asked. Manageable. Scale. 6. You're lying. 7, he said. 7.5. It's fine. She adjusted the IV flow and added a notation to the bedside chart. It wasn't fine, but it was survivable, and survivable was the target right now. The night-charge nurse, a compact, precise woman named Odette, who Maya knew from cross-departmental emergencies, appeared at the door. She took in the scene with the expression of someone who had seen a great deal in her career and was choosing to process this as a medical situation until someone told her otherwise. "What do you need?" Odette said. "Vascular surgeon paged for immediate consult. Second IV line, left arm, and I want a portable ultrasound up here in 10 minutes to check the repair site." Maya paused. "And this room needs to move. He can't stay in 412. "That's not a nursing decision," Odette said carefully. "I know. Get me Garrett." She glanced at the door. "He'll make it a federal decision." Garrett, to his credit, made it a federal decision in under 3 minutes. Ethan Cross was moved to a room on a different floor, one not listed in the main patient directory, with a different identifier on the outside, while the man on the floor of 412 was restrained, assessed by a second nurse for his injuries, and made ready for the questions that were going to come from a lot of people very soon. The vascular surgeon arrived at 20 past 10. Her name was Dr. Simone Tran, and she had the energy of someone who had been woken from the first real sleep she'd gotten in 2 days and was managing her irritation with professionalism only barely. She looked at the shoulder, ran the ultrasound herself, and then looked at Maya with an expression that was not quite accusatory, but was definitely pointed. "What happened to this repair site?" "Patient had a physical altercation. He's stable now. I held pressure for 11 minutes before you got here." Tran studied the screen. "The anastomosis is holding, barely." She looked at Ethan. "You understand that if you do anything like that again before this heals, we're in emergency surgery at 2 in the morning." "Understood," Ethan said. "I'm serious." "So am I." Tran looked at Maya again, the look that asked, "Are you going to make sure this patient does what I'm telling him?" And Maya returned the look that answered, "I'll do what I can, but you can see what we're working with here." Tran ordered a new dressing protocol, adjusted his pain management to something that would actually address a 7.5 without compromising his alertness, and left with the specific departure energy of a surgeon who had said everything she needed to say and expected it to be followed. The new room was quieter. One door. No windows on the exterior wall. Garrett was outside. Mara had returned and taken up a position at the end of the hall that gave him sight lines to both the elevator bank and the stairwell. Ethan was drowsy from the new pain medication, but fighting it. She could see the fight. "Sleep," she said. "Not yet." He turned his head toward her. "The drive. Mara has it." "I know, but there's something on it I didn't tell you about." He paused, organizing his words carefully the way people did when the medication was starting to pull at them. "The names on the file. 2 of them are at this hospital. Not clinical staff. Administration. Someone in this building has been on the payroll of the people who contracted the equipment fraud." She was very still. "Who?" "It's in the finance office records. I don't have their names. I have account numbers and transaction dates tied to a hospital administrator identifier. It'll take someone with access to the internal records to match them." His eyes were getting heavy. "Someone inside knows you found me. That's how they knew where to send the men tonight." "How long have you known this?" "Since this afternoon, when you told me the legal team woman had come up." She sat with that. Someone in Redwood Valley Medical Center's administration had been paid by the network Ethan had been investigating. That same network had tried to have him killed. And now, knowing their attempt on his room had failed, they were going to recalculate. And whoever was in this building was going to be part of that recalculation. "Ethan, if someone in administration knows about the drive, they don't know you have it. They knew he was trying to get it here, but they don't know it arrived." His voice was slowing. "That's the window." He was asleep before he finished the sentence. She turned the lights down and went out to find Mara. "What?" She found him in the family lounge at the end of the 4th floor's new wing, sitting in one of the plastic chairs that no one had ever found comfortable, with the encrypted drive on the table in front of him and his phone face down beside it. "He told you about the hospital connection," Mara said. It wasn't a question. You already knew. I had a partial picture. Cross's documentation gives us the account numbers. We need the hospital's internal financial records to close the gap. He looked at her. That requires either a warrant, which takes time we may not have if the people inside this building are already moving, or someone with internal access who can pull records quietly before anyone knows what we're looking for. Maya looked at the drive on the table. I'm a nurse. You have a Level 2 system access badge from when you covered the administrative intake desk 18 months ago during the staff shortage. I checked. He said it without apology. That access was never revoked. She looked at him for a long moment. You checked my access level. I've been building this picture for 4 months. You became part of it when Cross sent the drive. He held her gaze. I'm not asking you to do anything illegal. Reviewing financial records with a valid internal access credential is an administrative function. What you do with what you find is a different matter. What I do with it is hand it to you. Yes. She thought about Ethan asleep down the hall with a repaired blood vessel that was barely holding and a surgical consult in the morning. She thought about the woman who had come to the 4th floor at 6:30 with a story about liability documentation. She thought about this man who had used a cloned badge to get into 412 and had gotten close enough to Ethan that Ethan had put him on the floor with a broken arm from a position of significant medical disadvantage. If I pull those records and someone in administration sees the query, they'll know what we're looking at, she said. Yes, which is why it needs to happen in the next 2 hours before the morning shift generates enough system traffic to bury a flag. He pushed the drive slightly toward her across the table. The records need to be pulled, copied to this, and the drive gets couriered to Washington by 6 a.m. She picked up the drive. You're going to owe me a significant explanation when this is done, she said. You'll have it. She stood up. The hospital at 11 p.m. was a different organism than the hospital at noon. Quieter, slower, operating on skeleton staff and institutional habit. She knew its rhythms. She had worked inside them for 3 years. She took the stairs down to the 2nd floor, where the administrative offices were locked but accessible with a Level 2 badge, and she went to work. The financial record system was not designed to be intuitive. It was designed to satisfy auditors and confuse everyone else, which was the default state of hospital administrative software everywhere. She had used it exactly twice during the intake desk coverage, once to pull a billing record for a patient complaint, and once to correct an insurance code error. Both times she had found it deeply unpleasant. She found it deeply unpleasant again now. She worked through it methodically, pulling the account number ranges that Mara had given her verbally in the lounge, cross-referencing against the administrator identifier codes in the system. The office was dark except for the monitor glow, and she kept the overhead lights off because there was a glass panel on the door, and the corridor outside was occasionally used by security on rounds. She found the first match at 11:47, an account number in Ethan's file tied to an administrator code that resolved in the hospital system to a name. She stared at it for a moment. Then she copied everything to the drive and kept going, because there was a second account number and she needed to know where that one landed too. It landed in the same department, different name, different role, but the same reporting structure, which meant this wasn't 2 independent bad actors. It was a coordinated arrangement inside a single administrative chain. She pulled both records, verified the transaction dates matched what was in Ethan's file, and copied everything. She was about to close the system when she noticed something she hadn't been looking for. A query had been run on the hospital's system earlier that evening, a records access, time-stamped at 6:34 p.m. using an administrator credential. The query had pulled the intake records for Ethan Cross, his admission time, his attending physician, and the names of every clinical staff member who had been logged as present during his initial treatment. Her name was on that list. She sat in the dark office with that information for about 10 seconds. Then she closed the system, removed the drive, and walked out of the office with the steady pace of someone who knew exactly what she was walking back to. She was in the stairwell, second step up to the 3rd floor, when the hospital's overhead system did something she had never heard it do in 3 years. Every light in the building went out, not the backup generators. Those took 12 seconds to kick in, and she counted. 12 seconds of absolute dark and absolute silence. The monitors and ventilators running on battery backup, the alarms going to their emergency tones. And then the generators came on and the emergency lighting threw everything into red-tinged shadow, and the overhead PA crackled and the night supervisor's voice came through tight and controlled. All staff, this is a facility-wide emergency. All non-essential personnel shelter in place. Security to all access points immediately. Maya was already moving up the stairs. She came out onto the 4th floor into organized chaos. Nurses moving fast, Garrett at the far end of the corridor with his weapon drawn, 2 security guards she didn't recognize running toward the new room where Ethan Cross was supposed to be sleeping off his pain medication. She saw Mara at the door to the room. His face, when he turned and found her in the corridor, told her everything before he said a word. "He's gone," Mara said. "Not dead, not taken. Gone." As in, Ethan Cross, with a barely repaired blood vessel and enough painkillers in his system to sedate a smaller man, had gotten out of that bed and walked out of this hospital on his own, and nobody had seen him go. And on the pillow where his head had been, there was a single folded piece of paper. Mara held it out to her. She unfolded it. 4 words. In handwriting she recognized from field logs written on the backs of maps in bad light a long time ago. Trust no one else. She looked up. Garrett was looking at her. Mara was looking at her. The 2 security guards she didn't recognize were looking at her. She folded the paper and put it in her pocket, and she thought about the names she'd found in the administrative records, and she thought about the query run at 6:34 p.m. that had pulled her name from the intake log, and she thought about Ethan Cross somewhere in a Phoenix night with a broken shoulder and a vascular repair that was barely holding together. "We need to talk," she said to Mara. "Right now. Not here." Mara nodded. He started moving toward the stairwell. She followed him, and as she passed the nursing station, she caught Odette's eye, and Odette was looking at her with the expression of someone who had been in this building long enough to understand that something very large had just changed and was waiting to find out on which side of it everyone was going to land. Maya didn't stop. She went through the stairwell door, and the sound of the alarms followed her down. The stairwell door closed behind them and the alarm sound dropped to a muffled pulse, and Mara turned to face her on the landing with the expression of a man who had stopped managing the situation and started being inside it. "Talk," he said. She handed him the drive. Both names are on there, same department, same reporting chain. The second account number cross-references to a transaction dated 3 weeks before Cross was shot. She kept her voice flat and even. And someone in that department ran a query at 6:34 tonight that pulled the intake log for Cross's admission. My name was on that list. Mara looked at the drive. Something moved behind his eyes. Not surprised, the recalibration of someone whose picture had just sharpened into focus. "They know who you are," he said. "They know I was the attending nurse. They may not know the rest yet." She paused. "But if Ethan is out there with a compromised shoulder and those names haven't been secured yet, then whoever is in that department has every reason to accelerate whatever they're planning." "The drive goes to Washington," Mara said. "I have a courier standing by. That part is done." "That part isn't the part I'm worried about." He looked at her. Cross. "He left on his own, which means he had a reason, which means he knows something he didn't tell me, or he found out something after I left the room." She watched Mara's face. "Does he have a secondary location? Somewhere he'd go if the hospital was compromised? If he does, he didn't put it in anything I have access to." Mara said it without apology, but with something that might have been frustration. "Cross keeps operational details compartmentalized. It's why he's been effective, and it's why tonight is a problem. He had painkillers in his system and a vascular repair that Dr. Tran was already unhappy about. He can't have gotten far on foot." She thought about the note. Trust no one else. Not trust no one. The qualifier mattered. Not a blanket warning, a specific one. He trusts me. If he's reachable, I'm the one who can reach him. How? She thought about it. Ethan Cross, field-trained, compromised medically, moving through a city he hadn't been stationed in for years. He would go to ground somewhere low-profile and accessible and not connected to his official presence here. He would not go to a hotel that required ID. He would not go to anyone connected to the case. He would go somewhere he'd scouted in advance. because that was what people from their world did. They identified exits before they needed them. She knew that because she'd done the same thing when she arrived in Phoenix 3 years ago. She knew every secondary route out of her neighborhood. She knew which parking structures had blind spots and which coffee shops had back exits, and which motels on the east side took cash without asking for identification. She thought about the storage unit. She had given him 3 emergency contacts. The storage unit was one of them. She'd assumed he'd used it to leave the drive, but a storage facility had more than one unit. "I need a phone," she said. "Not mine. Not yours." Mara reached into his jacket and produced a burner, a basic prepaid, the kind that cost $20 and left no trace. He held it out. She took it. She dialed a number she'd memorized a long time ago, the way you memorize things that couldn't be written down. It rang 4 times. Then a voice, rough, careful, slightly medicated, but tracking. "You figured it out fast," Ethan said. "You're at the facility." "Adjacent. There's a motel, the Eastgate, room 11. I paid in advance 2 days ago." A breath. "I'm okay." "You're not okay. You have a vascular repair that—" "I know what I have. I also know that one of the 2 security guards who showed up at my door after the lights went out wasn't a Redwood Valley employee. I've seen his face before. Different context, different city." She absorbed that. He came in during the blackout. Someone killed the power to move people. Security floods in, half of them are real, 1 or 2 aren't. And in the confusion, you move a patient, or you remove something, or you make something happen that you need cover for. His voice was controlled, but she could hear the effort beneath it. "I wasn't going to wait to find out which one I was." The blackout was deliberate. Had to be. This isn't a hospital power failure, Maya. Someone cut the main feed. That's a coordinated action. He paused. "How bad is the shoulder?" She was going to be honest with him. "Tran was worried about the anastomosis before you left the bed. If you've been moving on it, there's a real risk of—" "I know the risk." "Then you know I need to be where you are in the next 30 minutes. A longer pause this time. "Eastgate Motel, room 11, he said. "Come alone." She handed the burner back to Mara. "I need a vehicle," she said. "Not mine. Mine may be tagged by now if someone pulled my record from the intake log and had enough time to run it." Mara didn't argue. He produced a key fob. "Gray Accord, level 2 of the visitor structure, north side. It's registered to a federal pool account. And I need you to do something while I'm gone." He waited. "The 2 names on that drive, the administrators. I need them kept in the building. Not arrested, not approached. Just kept here until the drive is confirmed received in Washington, and there's enough chain of custody that picking them up doesn't get thrown out on a procedural challenge." "That's a few hours." "I know." She took the key fob. "Can you manage that?" "I'll find reasons," he said. It wasn't reassuring exactly, but it was honest, and she'd learned to prefer honesty to reassurance when the stakes were real. She went down the remaining stairs through the loading dock exit and across the parking structure to the Gray Accord without running. Running attracted attention. She had learned to move urgently without looking urgent, and it was one of the skills she'd never stopped using even in 3 years of trying to be someone different. The Eastgate Motel was 12 minutes from the hospital on surface streets. A single-story building arranged in an L shape around a parking area with 2 lights that actually worked and one that didn't. Room 11 was at the far end of the short side of the L, which was either coincidence or deliberate positioning for sightlines, and given who had rented it, she was confident it wasn't coincidence. She knocked twice, paused. Once more. The pattern wasn't prearranged, but she did it instinctively, and the door opened. Ethan Cross looked worse than he had 2 hours ago, which was saying something. He had put on a shirt over the shoulder dressing, which had required a level of determination she didn't want to calculate, and he was standing in the doorway with his weight slightly to the left, favoring the repaired side without fully committing to it in the way that trained people did when they didn't want to show weakness and couldn't entirely prevent it. She went inside. She checked the room in 2 seconds. Door, window, bathroom, and then she turned on the lamp by the bed and looked at his shoulder. "Sit," she said. He sat on the edge of the bed. She helped him ease the shirt off, which took longer than it should have and involved a moment where his face went very still and very pale, and he breathed through his nose until the moment passed. The dressing had held. There was blood at the edge of it, more than there'd been in the hospital room, but the amount was consistent with movement stress rather than a full blowout. She repacked it with supplies from the emergency kit she'd brought from her storage unit, the one she'd left in the car because she'd had the thought, coming down the stairs, that she might need it. The fake security guard, she said while she worked, you recognized him. 8 months ago, different operation, different state. He was working logistics for a supply chain contractor. Ethan's voice was steady, but thin. If he's here, it means the network has people positioned inside hospital security, not just administration. How many people does this network have? Enough to run contracts across 6 military procurement channels for 3 years without being caught. He watched her hands on his shoulder. They're not amateurs. The administrator connection at Redwood Valley is probably just a payment node, someone they bought access from, not a core operator. That doesn't make them less dangerous tonight. No, he agreed. It doesn't. She finished the dressing and stepped back. She looked at him properly, Oz. At his face, his color, the way he was managing the pain. He needed fluids, rest, and a surgical suite within the next several hours. What he had was a motel room and her. I need to tell you something, she said. He looked at her. The drive is with Mara. It goes to Washington tonight. The names are documented. The transaction records are documented. Now, and there's an audit trail now that can't be pulled back. She paused. But until the people in Washington confirm receipt and authorize action, the 2 administrators at the hospital are still inside the building, still able to communicate with whoever is running this. Which means they know the drive left the hospital, Ethan said. Probably. And they know the fake security guard didn't finish whatever he came to finish. Yes. He was quiet for a moment, working through it. She could see him do it. The same systematic processing she'd watched in the field. The way he moved through a problem like he was clearing a building, room by room, no rushing. They're going to try to create a different kind of damage, he said finally. If they can't recover the drive and they can't remove me, they're going to try to discredit the documentation before it can be acted on. How? By going after the source. He looked at her. Me, my record, my fitness. He said it flatly, without drama. I'm a patient who left a hospital against medical advice in the middle of the night after a violent incident in my room. I have painkillers in my system. I have a classified history that can be selectively characterized. He paused. If someone files a report suggesting I was unstable, compromised, or acting outside authorized parameters, that creates a credibility problem for everything in that file before anyone in Washington has a chance to look at it. She understood. They're going to try to get ahead of it. They have enough people in enough places to do it fast. He looked at his hands, and they have one more thing. Someone, I don't know who yet, leaked my location to the men who shot me. That person is still operational, still out there, and they know I know it. Maya sat down in the chair across from him. The lamp threw a narrow cone of yellow light across the bed between them, and outside the window the parking area was quiet and the one working light buzzed against the dark. Mara, she said, how much do you trust him? Enough to give him the drive, not enough to tell him this. He met her eyes. The leak that put me in front of those guns, I've narrowed it to 4 people. Mara is one of them. She let that sit for a moment. You said he sent me the text. I said the text came from the protocol number. I've had reason in the last 4 months to think that protocol may have been accessed by more than one person. His voice was careful. I don't know it's him, but I don't know it isn't. Then the drive going to Washington is still the right call. The courier is clean. I verified the chain before I left. It doesn't go through Mara's hands again after tonight. He paused. But if Mara is the leak, he knows we have the names. He knows the documentation is moving. And he knows that I'm the only witness who can put him in a room and place him inside the timeline. She looked at him. Which makes you a loose end. Which makes me a loose end, he agreed. He said it calmly, in the way people were calm about things they had already made their peace with. It made her want to argue with him, and she didn't, because arguing with that kind of calm was like arguing with weather. What do you need? She said. I need to get to a secure communication point before anyone knows where I am. There's a Senate investigator, so not through Mara's chain, who has been waiting for this file for 6 weeks. If I can reach her directly and confirm the drive is in transit, she can begin the authorization process from her end without going through the agencies being investigated. You have her contact. He touched his temple. Up here. Of course it is. She stood up. Okay. Give me the number. I'll call from the burner Mara gave me, which he'll be able to trace, but by the time he does, it won't matter. You're using his own equipment against him. I'm using available resources. She held out her hand for the number. There's a difference. He gave it to her. She called. The phone rang twice and was answered by a woman whose voice was clipped and alert, in the way of people who kept phones close to them because their work required it. And Maya gave her a 6-word identifier that Ethan said quietly from the bed. And the woman on the other end said, confirmed. Status? Drive is in transit. Estimated delivery before 6 a.m. Documentation complete. Maya looked at Ethan. He nodded once. Primary source is secure and requesting direct contact in the next 24 hours. Location? Not on this line. A pause. Understood. We'll initiate from our end. Give me 6 hours. The call ended. Maya put the burner on the table. Outside, a car entered the motel parking area. She tracked its headlights across the window without moving toward it. The car parked at the far end and the lights went off, and no one got out for 30 seconds, which was 30 seconds too long. She turned off the lamp. We have company, she said quietly. Ethan was already off the bed. Not fast. There was nothing fast available to him right now. But deliberate, managing the shoulder, moving toward the bathroom wall because it was interior and load-bearing and the best cover in the room. She went to the window and looked through the gap in the curtain. The car was a dark sedan, and the person who had finally gotten out was walking toward the motel office, not toward room 11, which was either innocent or designed to look innocent. Then her phone, her actual phone, the work phone she still had in her pocket, lit up with a text from a number she recognized as the hospital's internal system. The text was from Odette. 2 people from admin just tried to badge out of the building. Security held them per someone's request. One of them is making a lot of noise. The other one called a lawyer 10 minutes ago. Thought you should know. She read it twice. She showed it to Ethan. He looked at it. Something shifted in his face. Not relief. Something older and more complicated than relief. The expression of a man who had been right about something for a very long time and was watching the proof of it finally surface and finding that it felt less satisfying than he'd thought it would. The name's on the drive, he said. Still in the building, she said. Mara held them. Then he might be clean. Or he held them to control what they say before they talk to anyone. Ethan made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. You always did think 3 moves ahead. You taught me that. He hadn't. She'd known it before she'd ever met him, but she said it because it was the kind of thing you said when someone needed to believe they'd left something useful behind in the world, and she understood that need even if she didn't always share it. The sedan in the parking area still had no one near it. She sent a reply to Odette. Thank you. Make sure the security log documents both attempts to badge out with timestamps. Don't let anyone delete anything. She pocketed the phone. We need to move you in the next 2 hours, she said. Somewhere with a medical setup. Not a hospital. Somewhere I can manage the shoulder and keep you stable until the Senate investigator can secure a location. I have one option, he said, but it requires a call I'd rather not make. To who? He told her. She stared at him. You want me to call Dr. Keller? He has a private practice annex on the north side, closed at night, clean, equipped, off the hospital network. He watched her face. And he doesn't know enough about any of this to be a liability, which currently makes him one of the safest people in your contact list. She thought about Keller standing behind his desk with his arms crossed. She thought about him handing back the needle she'd given him without acknowledging what it meant. She thought about the 2 words he'd said in the corridor, good catch, and how much it had cost him to say even that much. He's going to have questions, she said. Let him have them. Ethan's voice was tired now, the medication and the blood loss and the accumulated weight of the night pulling at him. Sometimes the right person for a job is just the one who's available and hasn't already betrayed you. It was not, she thought, a ringing endorsement. But it was honest, and tonight honest was what she had to work with. She picked up the burner and dialed Keller's number from the hospital's internal directory. which she had memorized without intending to. The way you memorize things you interacted with every day, whether you meant to or not. It rang 5 times. Then Keller's voice, alert, guarded, carrying the particular quality of a man who had been awake for the past hour trying to understand what was happening in his hospital. "This is Carter," she said. "I need your help. I can't explain everything right now. But I need your annex, and I need you not to ask me what I can't answer yet. And I need you to understand that if you say no, a man who helped keep this country safer than most people know it needs to be kept is going to spend the night in a motel room with a compromised vascular repair." A long silence. Then Keller said, "Give me 20 minutes. She ended the call. She turned to tell Ethan, but Ethan was looking at the window, at the gap in the curtains, and his face had the focused, very still quality she recognized from the moments in the field right before something happened. "The sedan," he said quietly. She turned. The car was empty. Had been empty for the past few minutes, she realized. She'd been watching the driver walk away, and she'd been watching the space around the car, but she hadn't been watching the motel office window, which was where the light was now on, where someone was talking to the night clerk, where a hand had just extended something across the counter. A photograph. The clerk looked at it, looked up, looked toward the far end of the parking area, toward the short side of the L, toward room 11. She moved before the clerk looked away from the window. "Bathroom, now." She said it low and flat, the tone that didn't invite discussion, and Ethan was already moving because he'd heard that tone before in situations where hesitation had a body count. The bathroom had no window. That was a problem, and also, in this specific moment, a solution. No line of sight from outside. Solid interior walls. One entry point she could monitor. She helped Ethan get to the floor beside the tub because the tub was cast iron and old and the best ballistic cover in the room, and she killed the bathroom light and went back to the main room in the dark. She checked the window again. The clerk had stopped looking. The person with the photograph was still at the counter, talking, and the clerk was shaking his head now. The universal gesture of someone who didn't want trouble and was trying to communicate that fact. The person at the counter didn't move. Maya had 30 seconds, maybe less. She pulled the Glocka from her waistband and checked it by feel. She went to the door and opened it 6 inches and looked at the parking area. The sedan. 3 other cars that had been there when she arrived. The far end of the L shape of the building, where the outdoor vending machine threw a rectangle of yellow light across the pavement. No one visible. Which meant if they'd sent someone to the office with a photograph, they'd also sent someone around the back. She closed the door. She went to the bathroom. "Back exterior," she said. "How many do you think?" "At least 2. One covers the exit, one confirms the room." Ethan's voice was controlled, but she could hear him working to keep it that way. "They're not here to talk." "I know." She crouched beside him. "I'm going to do something that's going to sound worse than it is." That's never been a reassuring sentence. "I'm going to go out the front." A pause. "Maya, the person in the office has one job right now, which is to confirm we're here. The moment they confirm it, they communicate to whoever is outside, and the window closes." She looked at him in the dark. "If I go out first, I change the geometry. They're expecting to contain, not to intercept one person moving toward them. You're one person with a handgun against however many they sent. I've had worse odds." He didn't argue with that, because he knew it was true, and because arguing with it wasn't going to change anything, and because people who had operated the way they both had understood that sometimes the math of a situation was the math of the situation, and the only variable you could adjust was your own movement. "Stay down," she said. "Don't move unless you hear me come back." "And if you don't come back?" She thought about that honestly, the way she'd learned to think about the honest version of bad outcomes, rather than the comfortable version. "Then Keller's on his way and you call the Senate investigator directly and you tell her everything." She stood up. She went to the front door. She opened it and walked out into the parking area like someone who had a reason to be there. The person from the office appeared at the corner of the building 40 feet away. She saw them before they saw her. A fraction of a second advantage, which was all she needed. She changed her angle and moved left, toward the sedan, which put a vehicle between her and that corner, and she heard a voice say something sharp and short into a phone or a radio. The back of the building. She went the long way around, along the front face of the motel, past the office, and the clerk inside looked at her through the glass with the expression of a man who wanted very badly to be somewhere else tonight. She kept moving. The person from the office was behind her now, tracking but not running. They didn't want noise, didn't want attention, which was the same calculation she was making from the other side. She came around the far corner of the building. There was one person at the back, standing near the exterior wall of room 11, which was exactly where she'd predicted, and they were looking at their phone and they hadn't heard her come around the corner because she'd spent years learning to come around corners without being heard. She had about 2 seconds before they looked up. She used them. It was not clean and it was not graceful, and her elbow hit the wall on the follow-through in a way that sent a jolt up to her shoulder that she was going to feel for a week. But the person went down, and they went down quiet, and she was on them before they could get the phone to their mouth. A zip tie from her jacket pocket. She had carried zip ties as a matter of habit for so long that she no longer noticed them until she needed them. And the person's hands were secured behind their back. She took the phone and the weapon from their holster, and the radio clipped to their belt. She stood up. The radio crackled. A voice said, "Confirm status." She let it crackle. The person from the front of the building came around the corner. They saw her. They saw the person on the ground. They had about half a second to process both before she had the Glock level, and her voice was doing the thing it did when she'd stopped having options and started making them. "On the ground," she said. "Hands out. Do it now." The half-second passed. The calculation happened behind their eyes. She could see it, the quick, hard math of the moment. Then they went down, because people who were in the business of assessing situations knew when a situation had been assessed against them. She secured the second person and took their radio. She checked the parking area in both directions. Nothing moved. She went back to room 11 and knocked twice, paused once more. The door opened. Ethan was standing in the bathroom doorway, not on the floor where she'd left him, because of course he was. He looked at her. He looked at her elbow, which had a scrape from the wall that was bleeding in a minor but visible way. "Are you hurt?" he said. "It's a scrape." "Are you hurt anywhere that matters?" "No." She came inside and closed the door. "Two people down in the parking area. We have maybe 10 minutes before whoever sent them expects a check-in." "Then we move now." "You're in no condition to—" "I'm in worse condition if we stay." He was already moving toward the door, and it was the same argument they'd been having in different forms all night, and she made the same calculation she'd been making all night, which was that he was right, and she hated that he was right. She called Keller from the burner while they moved to the Accord. Keller answered on the second ring. "I'm 5 minutes from the annex," he said without preamble, and she understood that he'd spent his 20 minutes in transit rather than deliberating, which told her something about him she hadn't known before. "We're coming now," she said. "Come in through the back entrance and leave it unlocked." She got Ethan into the passenger seat and drove. Awesome. The annex was a converted townhouse on a quiet street in the north of the city, the kind of building that looked like a residence from the outside and contained, behind its unremarkable door, a private consultation suite that Keller used for pre-surgical assessments and follow-up care for patients who valued discretion. She'd known it existed. He'd mentioned it once, in passing, during a conversation about post-operative monitoring options, and she had filed it the way she filed things, without knowing why, for a future she hadn't anticipated. Keller was inside when they arrived. He opened the door and looked at Ethan Cross with the expression of a trauma physician immediately and involuntarily assessing a patient, the professional reflex that overrode everything else in the first 3 seconds. "He needs to lie down," Keller said. "Yes," Maya agreed. "The shoulder?" "Repaired by Tran this afternoon. He's stressed it. I repacked the dressing twice. I'm worried about the anastomosis holding through the night." Keller nodded once and moved, and that was the thing about Keller that she had always known, even when she'd resented everything else about him. When there was a patient in front of him who needed something, he stopped being the person who made everyone feel small and started being the doctor he actually was. She'd seen it in the trauma bay. She saw it now. He got Ethan to the examination table. He checked the dressing with gloved hands, and his face did the careful non-expression of a clinician seeing something he didn't love but wasn't panicking about. "It's holding," he said. "Barely. He needs to stay still." "Tell him that," Maya said. I can hear you both, Ethan said from the table. Then hear this, Keller said. If this repair fails tonight, you're in emergency surgery at 2 in the morning and no one here is equipped for that. So you're going to lie still and you're going to let her manage your dressing and you're going to stop making decisions with your body that your body is clearly not capable of executing right now. Ethan looked at the ceiling. Fine. Keller looked at Maya. You want to tell me what's actually happening? She told him. Not everything. Not the classified history, not the specifics of Ethan's investigation. But enough. The administrative connection, the deliberate blackout, the 2 people in the parking area, the drive moving to Washington. She told him cleanly and without embellishment, and he listened without interrupting, which was something she hadn't expected from him, and which she noted. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. The administrator, he said. Which department? She told him. He made a sound she couldn't quite characterize. I've had issues with that department for 2 years. Budget manipulations, procurement overrides. I filed 3 internal complaints. He paused. They went nowhere. They will now, she said. He looked at her. In the flat light of the annex examination room, with everything stripped of the hospital's hierarchies and her ID badge and his title on the door, he looked like what he actually was. A tired man in his 50s who had spent a long career being right about medicine and wrong about people, and was only now beginning to understand the cost of that imbalance. The decompression, he said. This morning. You knew before I listened. Yes. How long have you had that kind of clinical read? She looked at him evenly. Longer than I've worked for you. He absorbed that. He nodded slowly, in the way of someone who is doing the honest accounting of a thing they've been avoiding. I owe you more than an apology, he said. I know that's not adequate. It's a start, she said. And she meant it. She wasn't interested in his guilt. Guilt was his to manage. What she was interested in was whether the person standing across from her was going to be useful for what came next, and she was beginning to think he might be. Stay here with him, she said. I need to go back to the hospital. Keller frowned. Why? Because the drive is in transit and the names are documented, but there are 2 administrators in that building who are still in contact with whoever sent the people tonight. And until someone makes the connection formal in public, they're going to keep trying to get ahead of it. She picked up her jacket. And because I think Mara needs to answer some questions in front of people who can verify his answers. You think he's compromised? I think I don't know yet. And not knowing is a problem when he's the one currently managing the situation at the hospital. Ethan said from the table, without opening his eyes, Take the burner, not your phone. She was already putting her phone on the counter. She picked up the burner. She went to the door. Carter, Keller said. She stopped. Be careful. He said it stiffly, like someone who didn't say that kind of thing often and was aware that it was inadequate but said it anyway because it was honest. Please. She went out. She drove back to Redwood Valley Medical Center at 12:43 in the morning and badged in through the loading dock the same way she'd come in earlier, and the building was quieter now, but not quiet. Hospitals after midnight had their own kind of noise, the sounds of machines and occasional voices, and the underlying hum of a place that never fully stopped. She found Mara on the 3rd floor, outside the room that had been Ethan's second location, talking on his phone. He ended the call when he saw her. Cross, he said. Stable. Secure location. Where? She looked at him. I'm not going to tell you that right now. He held her gaze. Something moved in his expression, not offense, something closer to resignation. You think I'm the leak. I think Ethan's list of 4 people includes you. I think the protocol number you used to text me may have been accessed by more than one person. I think the right move right now is to have this conversation in front of Garrett and whoever he can get on a verified line in the next 10 minutes. Mara was quiet. If you're clean, she said, this conversation clears you and we move forward. If you're not, she paused. You already know what happens if you're not. Another silence. Longer. Garrett's in the security office on the ground floor, Mara said. He said it quietly, without visible emotion, with the particular quality of a man who had decided something. She wasn't sure yet what he'd decided, but she moved carefully for the next several minutes regardless. Garrett was in the security office with two of his own people and a hospital security supervisor named Fowler, who had the look of a man who had been awake for 20 hours and was running entirely on professional obligation. He looked at Maya when she came in and said, "You're the nurse." "Yes." "You want to tell me where Commander Cross is?" "After," she said. She looked at Garrett. "I need a verified line to whoever is receiving the drive in Washington. I need it confirmed that it arrived and that the chain of custody is intact. And I need that confirmation to happen in front of Mara." Garrett looked at Mara. Mara was standing near the door with his arms at his sides and his face giving nothing away. "Why in front of Mara specifically?" Garrett said. "Because one of the 4 people who could have leaked Cross's location before he was shot is in this room right now," Maya said. "And confirming the chain of custody either clears him or closes the window he might use to interfere." The room was very still for a moment. Then Garrett picked up his phone. The call took 11 minutes. In those 11 minutes, no one said very much. Fowler looked at his desk. Garrett's 2 people stood near the wall with the particular stillness of trained people waiting to be needed. Mara stood near the door. Maya stood between them and tried to read the room the way she'd learned to read rooms, not by what people said, but by what their bodies did with the silence. Mara didn't move toward the door. He didn't reach for his phone. He stood with his weight even on both feet and his hands visible, which was either the behavior of an innocent man or the behavior of a very experienced operator who knew exactly how to look innocent. She wouldn't know until the call ended. Garrett said, "Confirmed. Drive received at 12:51 a.m. Chain of custody documented from source. Recipient is briefing the Oversight Committee chair in," he checked his watch, "4 hours." He looked at Mara. Mara said, "The leak wasn't me." "Then who?" Garrett said. "Barlow." He said it flatly, without drama. "Deputy Director level, DIA, 2 layers above my reporting chain. He's been on the network's payroll for 14 months. I suspected him at month 10. I couldn't prove it without Cross's documentation." He paused. "I also couldn't tell Cross directly, because if Barlow knew Cross was being warned through me, I was done." He looked at Maya. "The text I sent you, I routed it through the protocol number specifically because Barlow had access to my direct line. I needed it to reach you without going through him." The room absorbed this. "Barlow's going to know the drive arrived," Maya said. "He already knows," Mara said. "He's been monitoring the recipient's communications. He'll be in motion in the next 2 hours trying to get ahead of the committee briefing." He looked at Garrett. "Which means we need to move on him in the next 90 minutes. Garrett was already on another call. Maya sat down in the chair nearest to her because her legs had decided, independently of her plans, that they'd been operating at a deficit for several hours and were going to collect on that now. She put her hands flat on her thighs and breathed and let her body do what it needed to do for about 30 seconds, which was the longest she'd allowed it all night. Then she stood back up because there was still more. The 2 administrators, a financial director named Prescott and a procurement coordinator named Gallo, were formally detained at 2:15 in the morning when federal investigators arrived at Redwood Valley Medical Center with paperwork that made the situation something that hospital security and legal counsel could no longer manage with polite conversation. Maya watched it happen from the corridor near the security office. She watched Prescott come out of the room where he'd been held for the past several hours, and she watched his face when the agent showed him the authorization, and she watched him understand in real time that the thing he'd been constructing, the story about administrative access and liability documentation and routine record review, had just run out of runway. He looked down the corridor and saw her. She didn't look away. She held his gaze for about 5 seconds, which was long enough for him to understand that the woman who had pulled the financial records from the second-floor office was the same woman who had been quietly doing her job in his building for 3 years without anyone paying attention to her. Then she looked away, because she didn't need it to last longer than that. Gallo, by contrast, said nothing, and looked at nothing, and was walked out with the careful economy of someone who had already calculated that silence was the best remaining option. His lawyer was apparently already on the phone with someone. Maya noted this and filed it for Garrett, who had enough jurisdictional authority to make a lawyer's phone call to the wrong person a problem rather than a solution. The hospital, in the hours that followed, was strange. It was still a hospital. Patients still needed things, monitors still alarmed. The overnight staff still moved through their tasks with the practiced routine that held a medical facility together regardless of what was happening in the corridors. But there was a quality to the building now that Maya recognized from other situations where the ground had shifted and people were still learning which way to stand. She went up to the 4th floor. She sat at the nursing station and wrote up her documentation for the night. What she had done clinically, what she had observed, what she had reported to whom and when. She wrote it carefully and specifically and without gaps, because she had learned a long time ago that the paperwork was the thing that survived when everything else got complicated, and right now complicated was an understatement. Odette found her there at around 3:30. "You should go home," Odette said. "I know. I mean it. You've been here for—" Odette stopped calculating. "A very long time." "I'm almost done." Odette sat down beside her. She was quiet for a moment, looking at the nursing station's array of screens with the expression of someone deciding whether to say something. "I've worked here for 9 years," she said. "I've seen a lot of people come through this department. Good nurses, bad nurses, nurses who burned out and nurses who ran on fumes, and nurses who somehow just kept going." She paused. "I knew from the first 6 months that you were different. Not better than everyone, but different. Like someone who had a whole other picture in their head and was choosing to only show you the corner of it." Maya stopped typing. "I didn't pry," Odette said. "It wasn't my business. But I want you to know that whatever happened tonight, and whatever you did, and whatever comes out about who you actually are, none of it surprises me. Not one part of it." Maya looked at her. Odette was one of those people whose face had accumulated its history honestly. Lines around the eyes from decades of night shifts and difficult conversations and the specific kind of care that hospital work demanded. She was looking at Maya now with a directness that was neither pity nor judgment. "Thank you," Maya said. She meant it more than the words were able to carry. Odette patted the counter once and stood up and went back to work. That was all. It was enough. At 6:14 in the morning, Mara called the burner. "Barlow is in custody," he said. "Federal agents picked him up at his home at 04:45. The committee chair has been briefed. The drive has been authenticated." A pause. "It's done." She was sitting in her car in the hospital parking structure. She had been intending to drive home for the past 40 minutes and had not yet managed to start the engine. "Cross?" she said. "Secure. The Senate investigator arranged a protected location. He's being transferred this morning with a medical team." Another pause. "He asked me to tell you something." She waited. "He said, the pillow helped." She sat with that for a moment, then she started the car. She drove to Keller's annex first. She knew Ethan wouldn't be there. He'd been transferred before dawn, which was correct and necessary, and the right outcome for the situation. But she went anyway, because Keller was still there, and she had something to finish with him before she could let the night close. He answered the door in the same clothes he'd been wearing hours earlier, which told her he hadn't slept. He stepped aside and let her in, and made coffee without asking, which was the right instinct, and they sat across from each other at the small table in the annex's consultation waiting area with cups that were too hot to drink and didn't touch them anyway. "How is he?" Keller said. "Transferred, medical team, secure location. He'll need surgery within the week, but he'll make it." Keller nodded. He looked at his coffee. "The administrators. Detained last night, federal charges, procurement fraud, conspiracy, obstruction. The specifics will develop, but they won't be coming back to this building." The network they were connected to. "The leadership is in custody as of 4:45 this morning. The documentation is with a Senate Oversight Committee." She paused. "It's going to take time to unwind all of it, but the core is done." He was quiet for a moment. 3 years, he said. "You were in my department for 3 years." "Yes. And He stopped. He was clearly a person who found this particular kind of sentence difficult to finish, which was its own information. "I treated you as someone who didn't have anything to offer beyond the immediate task in front of her." "You did," she said. "I wrote in your file that you were competent but not ambitious." He said it like something he was making himself look at directly. What I should have written was that I didn't understand you, and I found that uncomfortable, and I chose to resolve the discomfort by deciding you were less than you were." She looked at him. He wasn't a changed person. She didn't believe in changed people, not completely, not from a single night of pressure. But he was a person who was doing the honest accounting, and she had enough respect for that process to let it happen without rushing it. "The 3 internal complaints you filed about that department," she said. He looked up. "File them again, with everything from last night attached, every timestamp, every badge log, everything Garrett gives you clearance to include. File them through the federal channel Mara will set up, not the internal process." She paused. "You were right about the problem for 2 years. Make sure that's documented." Something shifted in his face. "Why does that matter to you?" "Because the system that let them operate was the same system that decided I didn't have anything worth listening to. And both of those things need a paper trail if you want them to actually change." He looked at her for a long moment. "You're going to stay at Redwood Valley?" She hadn't decided. She realized sitting there that she genuinely hadn't decided, and that the not deciding was itself a kind of answer she needed to pay attention to. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. He nodded. He didn't push. She gave him credit for that. She drove home as the sun was coming up, which it did with the particular indifference of suns everywhere to what had happened to the people below them overnight. The city was starting, early traffic, delivery trucks, the first coffee shops opening their doors. Phoenix at 6:30 in the morning was a city that didn't know what had moved through it the night before. And it wouldn't. Not exactly. Not in the way she had experienced it. The news would have pieces of it. The public record would have the charges, the names, the official version, but the specific texture of it, the stairwells and the motel parking area and the cast iron bathtub and the coffee she and Keller hadn't touched, that belonged to the people who had been inside it. She parked in front of her apartment building and sat in the car for a while. She thought about what Odette had said, like someone who had a whole other picture in their head and was choosing to only show you the corner of it. That was accurate. It had been accurate for 3 years, and before that for all the years she'd been operating in a world where showing the whole picture was a liability. She had learned to keep the rest of herself in a Pelican case in a storage unit, locked down, safe from a life that wouldn't have known what to do with it. And she thought about what that had cost, not in the dramatic sense, not the things you lost in visible, documented ways, but the smaller costs. The way she'd let Keller reduce her in file notes for 3 years rather than challenge it, because challenging it meant explaining things she didn't want to explain. The way she'd filed her complaints about medication errors through the quiet channels, instead of standing in front of someone and saying, "I know more than you think I do, and you should listen." The way she'd moved through 3 years as the corner of a picture, choosing smallness, because smallness felt like safety. She had been wrong about what safety was. Safety wasn't making yourself easy to dismiss. Safety wasn't silence, wasn't managed invisibility, wasn't the careful calibration of how much of yourself you were allowed to be in a room with people who hadn't earned the rest. She had learned that from the field, a long time ago, and then she'd come to Phoenix and tried to unknow it, and it hadn't worked. And last night was the proof that it had never worked, that the whole picture had been there the entire time, just waiting for the moment when everything needed it. She went inside. She slept for 4 hours. She woke up before her alarm, which was the habit of someone whose body had been trained to not quite trust sleep, and she lay in the dark for a moment before she got up. Her phone, her actual phone, not the burner, had 12 missed calls, 7 from the hospital's administrative line, 3 from a number she didn't recognize, which turned out to be the hospital's chief medical officer, 1 from Odette, which was a text that said, "You're going to need to talk to some people today. I'll run interference as long as I can. Get some sleep first." And 1 from a number she recognized as the Senate investigators, which was a voicemail that said, formally and precisely, that her assistance in the matter of the previous night was documented and appreciated, and that a representative would be in contact within 48 hours. She listened to it twice. She deleted it. She got up and made actual coffee that she actually drank, and she stood at her kitchen window and watched the street below and let herself exist in the straightforward present tense of an ordinary morning, which was a thing she had learned not to take for granted.